She gave 12 years of her life to a tech empire, only to be erased like she never existed. But when they stole her work and underestimated her silence, they triggered a storm they couldn't contain. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a revolution. Watch how one woman turned corporate erasure into an unstoppable legacy. The air in the Porter Technologies headquarters always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and recycled ambition. Ivy Reeves had worked there for 12 years, her name etched on a plaque outside a windowless corner office, her accomplishments buried in systems no one cared to understand. She was an algorithm architect, one of the best, but her true talents had long been dismissed as routine efficiency. Her innovations made Porter millions, but she remained invisible. On the day it all began, Ivy stood outside the executive conference room, clutching a slim leather portfolio. Inside were the blueprints for a new predictive analytics engine she had quietly built in her spare time, something capable of transforming supply chain logistics. She had polished her pitch, rehearsed it in front of the bathroom mirror, and cleared her calendar. "Don't forget 10 minutes max," her manager, Garrick Stone, had said when she asked for a spot on the agenda. Garrick, with his manicured beard and tailored arrogance, rarely had time for anything not directly traceable to quarterly profits. But Ivy had delivered consistently, developed the core framework for their inventory optimization software, streamlined the client analytics, module and slashed report generation time by half. This time, she believed, he'd see it. Her. The room buzzed with conversation as she entered. Executives glanced up briefly, then returned to their laptops. Garrick motioned without looking. "You've got the floor, Ivy." She opened her portfolio, hands steady despite the adrenaline. "Thank you. What I'm about to share could reduce forecasting errors by 23% across our product lines. I've been developing a multi-layered learning model." "Wait," Garrick interrupted, glancing at his watch. "Is this something you were assigned?" "No," she said, straightening. "This was a personal project, but Then why are we spending company time on it?" Ivy's voice faltered. "Because it can save the company millions. I wanted to offer it formally, with compensation terms outlined. We could license..." Garrick laughed, a short, dismissive exhale. "License? Ivy, if you've built it while employed here, it belongs to Porter. That's how employment works." Murmurs rippled through the room. Ivy's jaw tightened. "Not if it was developed independently, off hours, on personal equipment. I've documented everything. I'm offering it because I believe it can help." "You're offering it with strings. That's not team spirit." Garrick looked around. "We have engineers who bring their ideas to the table every day without holding them for ransom. We reward loyalty." The word loyalty struck like a slap. Ivy had given 12 years, late nights, canceled vacations, weekends lost to gay code. She'd trained interns who now outranked her, watched male counterparts get bonuses for ideas she originated. "I'm not holding anything for ransom," she said, voice quiet but firm. "I'm asking to be treated fairly." "Fairness doesn't keep the lights on," Garrick replied. "Dismissed." She left the room in silence, portfolio pressed to her side. At her desk, she sat down, opened a terminal, and began extracting her documentation methodically, legally, without malice. That night, she submitted her resignation, effective immediately. 6 weeks later, Ivy sat in a sleek co-working space across the city, sunlight pouring through the glass walls. Her laptop hummed quietly. A new opportunity had emerged. Radius Solutions, a fast-growing logistics tech firm, had read her independent white paper and reached out. "Your models are brilliant," said Hayden Locke, Radius's CEO, during their interview. "And your story? That's exactly the kind of thinking we want here." He offered her a senior architect position on the spot, with equity. For the first time in over a decade, Ivy felt seen. She poured herself into the work, refining her algorithms, with a team that welcomed her input. Her ideas were debated, tested, and improved, not ignored. Radius's efficiency soared. Clients raved. Within 3 months, Hayden promoted her to Director of Systems Innovation. Then, in a twist of poetic timing, Porter Technologies began to unravel. Poor forecasting, supply delays, and rising client dissatisfaction. The system Ivy had tried to save them with might have been their lifeline. Instead, they'd scoffed. Marlene Tanaka, Porter's former VP of Client Experience, called her one evening. "Ivy," she said after a long pause, "I know we haven't always been close, but I wanted to say you were right. Garrick's a fool." "You're still there?" Ivy asked. "Not for long. Layoffs started today. They're blaming market conditions. Half the floor's gone. Operations, legal, even finance." Ivy's stomach turned. She had no love left for Porter, but the people, many of whom she'd mentored, deserved better. "What are you going to do?" "Hopefully not panic," Marlene said with a wry laugh. "I might send my resume to Radius." "Do that," Ivy said quietly. "We're hiring." She ended the call and stared at the city beyond her window. Porter's fall wasn't her doing, but it was a consequence of everything they'd ignored. The next morning, she pitched a bold idea to Hayden, a recruitment initiative targeting former Porter employees. Operation Rebound. But that came later. First, she needed to understand the true depth of the damage. That night, Ivy logged onto LinkedIn. She searched for every name she could remember: engineers, analysts, project managers. Dozens of profiles, each stamped with the same bitter phrase, "open to work." She opened a spreadsheet: name, title, years at Porter, skills, recommendations. By midnight, the list had 212 names, and Ivy Reeves was just getting started. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the laughter in that conference room, the patronizing chuckle Garrett gave when I dared to ask for what I deserved, but beneath the humiliation was a slow-burning fury. Not just for the dismissal, not even for the years of underappreciation, but for how easily I had let myself believe I was lucky to be tolerated. No more. Ivy Reeves, the loyal workhorse, was gone. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I opened a blank document and titled it Operation Rebound. The name came from something my grandmother used to say: "You don't bounce back from being broken unless you know how to land." I was about to teach Radius, and the world, how to land with precision. By morning, I had compiled a list of every former Porter employee I could find. LinkedIn was the starting point, but soon I was in alumni forums, Discord groups, and even old company emails I'd saved on a private drive. I built a spreadsheet with names, roles, contact information, and one painful column labeled last known status, unemployed, freelancing, consulting, open to work. There were 212 names by sunrise. 212 people whose careers were interrupted because a single man couldn't see the value of the people who built his empire. The next morning, I walked straight into Hayden's office without knocking. He looked up, surprised, but I didn't pause. "We need to talk about Porter's former employees." He closed his laptop. "What about them?" I dropped the printout of my spreadsheet on his desk. "These are people who lost their jobs when Porter collapsed. Radius has benefited enormously from their fall. We owe them something." He scanned the list. "We've already hired quite a few." "Not enough," I interrupted. "We can do more. I want to propose a formal recruitment initiative targeting Porter's displaced workers. And for those we can't hire directly, I want Radius to fund placement services and training programs." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with cautious curiosity. "That's an expensive proposition for people who don't work for us." "It's an investment," I said. "In our reputation, in our future, and it's the right thing to do." He tapped the table thoughtfully, then nodded. "Draft the proposal. I'll take it to the board." 3 weeks later, Operation Rebound launched. Radius committed to interviewing every qualified former Porter employee who applied. We partnered with 3 upskilling companies to provide training. For those close to retirement, we offered part-time consulting roles with full benefits. The response was overwhelming. Business journals praised our corporate responsibility. Clients brought up our initiative in sales meetings. Job applications tripled. We were no longer just a tech company. We were becoming a standard bearer for how the industry should treat displaced talent. The day after the press release, my phone rang. It was Marlene. "Was this your doing?" she asked, not unkindly. "Yes," I said. No hesitation. There was a long pause. Then, "Would you reconsider coming to Radius?" I hesitated. "Maybe, as a consultant. Not an employee. I'm too old to start over completely." We need your expertise, she said. Name your terms. 2 days later, Marlene was setting up an office down the hall from mine. Not everyone was as receptive. Jason, Porter's former operations manager, refused to return my calls. Patrice from accounting sent me an email titled simply, "Cowardice." It read, "You pretended to be one of us, but you were just waiting for your chance to climb over the wreckage." I read it twice and filed it into a folder labeled Consequences. I opened that folder more than I cared to admit. A growing collection of reminders that revenge, however strategic, was never clean. 8 months after I walked out of Porter for good, I received an unexpected email. Vance, Porter's former legal counsel, wanted to meet for coffee. "There's something you should know," he wrote. We met at a small cafe halfway between our offices. He looked older, lines around his eyes, streaks of gray that hadn't been there before. "I was let go last month," he said, stirring his coffee. "Part of the latest round of cuts." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "Radius is hiring in legal." He shook his head. "That's not why I reached out. It's about your algorithms, your documentation." I froze. "The court already ruled." "I know, and they ruled correctly. But there's something you don't know." He leaned in. "After your exit interview, when you mentioned your side projects, I went to Garrick. Told him we should investigate before making any decisions." I stared at him. "And?" He showed me old emails from 3 years ago. "You'd sent him detailed documentation of your systems, asked if the company wanted to formally acquire them. You even proposed fair compensation." My breath caught. "I don't remember that." "You CC'd me on them. I found them during the legal prep." Garrick replied dismissively, something like, "Just implement it. If it works, we'll sort out the details later." I sat back, stunned. "He knew," Vance said. "He knew the work was yours, properly documented. And when Radius launched your systems, he came to legal demanding that we sue you, despite knowing he had no case." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I showed him the emails," Vance continued. "Told him we couldn't proceed. He ordered me to do it anyway." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to know. What happened to Porter wasn't just about you. It was about arrogance. Garrick didn't just undervalue you. He did it to everyone. Legal, operations, customer service. He treated the whole company like it was disposable." I nodded slowly. "And now those parts are working elsewhere." "Exactly." That night, I sat on my apartment balcony, city lights flickering like thoughts I couldn't pin down. For the first time since this all began, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sober. Porter's collapse hadn't been my revenge. It had been inevitable. All I had done was expose the fracture lines already spreading beneath the surface. And then Garrick called. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity won. "Ivy," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm calling to apologize." I said nothing. "I knew about your projects. I knew you documented them. I thought," he sighed, "I thought you were too loyal to ever leave. So it didn't matter. You misjudged me. I misjudged everything. The board removed me yesterday. Porter's filing for Chapter 11 next week." I swallowed. "I'm sorry about the employees. That's why I'm calling. There's a final board meeting tomorrow. Severance packages are on the table. I want to recommend Operation Rebound to transition our remaining staff. You want to send them to Radius? I want them to have jobs. Pride doesn't matter anymore." We hung up, and I stood at my window for a long time, staring out at a city that hadn't noticed one empire fall as another rose. The next morning, Porter officially announced its bankruptcy. By afternoon, Radius's phones were ringing off the hook. Hayden called an emergency leadership meeting. "We need to scale up. Ivy, Operation Rebound is now our top priority." Within a month, we'd hired 173 former Porter staff, opened 3 new offices. My team had grown to 40 people, many of whom had once sat near me in those colorless Porter cubicles. Marlene became our chief customer experience officer. Jason eventually joined as a consultant. Even Vance came aboard to lead our expanding legal division. 1 year after I walked out of Garrick's office, I stood at a podium accepting the Industry Innovation Award. Cameras flashed. True innovation, I said, isn't just about systems or code. It's about recognizing the people behind them. Treat them as irreplaceable, and they will build the future. As the applause rose, I saw Garrick near the exit. He nodded. I nodded back. A silent exchange. Loss, growth, understanding. 6 months after receiving the Innovation Award, Radius was no longer a rising star in the tech industry. It was the standard. We had opened 2 international offices, partnered with 3 major cloud infrastructure companies, and secured multi-year contracts with global financial firms. Ivy Reeves had become a name people recognized not just in boardrooms, but in business, schools, and think tanks. Invitations for keynote speeches, mentorship summits, and panel discussions flooded my inbox, but I declined most of them. I wasn't in this for fame. I had work to do. Marlene and I had built an internal development program called Catalyst, focused on high-potential women and underrepresented groups in tech. Tessa, who once approached me nervously at the award ceremony, now led the development team for Radius's flagship AI platform. Her leadership style, collaborative, fierce, principled, was already turning heads. We had just closed our quarterly review when Hayden asked to see me in his office. His expression was unreadable, but there was something taut in the air. "What's going on?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. He leaned forward, fingers interlaced. "Porter has been acquired." I blinked. "By who?" Stanza Tech. I felt the name like a punch. Stanza Tech had once been our biggest rival for enterprise contracts. They played dirty. Price undercutting, aggressive legal threats, even trying to poach half of our beta testers back in the day. They're relaunching the Porter brand as Porter X. New leadership, new capital. But the board, they reached out. I raised an eyebrow. "To you?" "To you." Hayden handed me an envelope. Inside was a formal letter on Stanza Tech letterhead. An invitation to join Porter X as an advisor during their restructuring phase. They wanted my insight, my credibility, my blessing. I almost laughed. "You think this is real?" I asked. "They're serious. They've seen what you've done here, and they want to avoid the PR disaster of relaunching Porter without addressing its past." I tapped the envelope on my knee. "They want to sanitize the narrative. Use me as a redemption arc." Hayden shrugged. "Probably. But it's a paid role, 6 months, high level. No operational responsibilities. You'd have full autonomy." That night, I walked through the old Porter building. It had changed. The name was gone from the front. New logos, new security, new people. But the bones were the same. The conference room where my ideas were once dismissed. The elevator where I'd overheard colleagues joke about who'd get promoted if I ever left. The break room where Marlene and I shared our first coffee after one of Garrick's infamous Friday rants. Didn't feel bitterness anymore. Only clarity. The next day, I accepted the offer on one condition. I'd be allowed to conduct a full cultural audit of Porter's previous structure. Interviews, documents, exit surveys, and all findings would be made public. They agreed over. The next 6 months, I spoke with 112 former Porter employees, from junior developers to senior executives. I documented their stories, unpaid overtime, credit theft, whisper campaigns against outspoken women. The toxic ecosystem had been systemic, not circumstantial. The final report, titled Invisible Losses, went viral on LinkedIn within 48 hours. Business schools incorporated it into ethics courses. A Harvard Review editor called it a blueprint for post-collapse organizational diagnosis. Porter X struggled with the fallout, but they honored their commitment. They began implementing every single one of my recommendations: leadership training, anonymous reporting systems, IP protection education. One morning, as I reviewed an updated draft of Radius's next-gen platform, my assistant buzzed in. "You have a visitor. He says you'll know him." I looked up as Garrick stepped into my office. He looked older, thinner, but not defeated. He wore humility like a new suit, stiff, slightly awkward, but intentional. "I read the report," he said quietly. "All of it. I wanted to thank you for writing it." "You were part of it." "I know, and I still am. I've started mentoring founders in early-stage startups. trying to teach them what I failed to learn. There was a long pause. "You saved something," he said finally. "Maybe not Porter as it was, but something worth building." I nodded. That was the goal. After he left, I looked out my office window, thinking of the young woman I used to be, the one terrified of asking for a raise, afraid to stand up in rooms that never saw her as an equal. Now, I lead a company known for ethical innovation. My name opened doors I used to beg to enter. And more than that, I had created a place where people like me could thrive without apology. That afternoon, I received a letter from Tessa, a handwritten note, rare in our digital world. "Dear Ivy, this week, a junior dev asked me how to handle pushback on her original designs. I told her what you once told me. Don't wait 12 years to be heard. I'm passing that on now. With gratitude, Tessa." I smiled. Because legacy isn't always about disruption or awards. Sometimes it's about starting a chain reaction of people who know their worth and demand to be treated like they are irreplaceable. The following spring, Radius hosted its first ever Industry Ethics and Innovation Summit. What began as a modest, internal idea had snowballed into a national gathering of thought leaders, engineers, lawyers, and activists. I stood backstage at the auditorium's wings, watching Marlene command the stage with ease as she opened the event with poise and conviction. She'd gone from being my mentor to my peer, and now my partner in reshaping the industry's ethical backbone. Back in the green room, Tessa adjusted her blazer nervously, prepping for her first keynote panel. "What if they ask something I can't answer?" she whispered. "You'll tell them the truth," I said with a smile. "That's more than most people are brave enough to do." When she walked on stage to discuss algorithm transparency, I felt a flicker of pride deeper than any award could give me. After her talk, I headed into a breakout session focused on intellectual property rights. Vance sat beside me, nodding along. As a former startup founder, shared how his co-founder had stolen code and ghosted the company after securing Series A funding. As the discussion opened to the audience, a woman raised her hand, a former Porter employee I hadn't seen since the layoffs. She thanked the room, then added, "And thank you to Ivy Reeves, wherever you are, for making sure we weren't collateral damage." The entire room turned to look at me. I didn't shrink from it this time. Later that evening, I stepped out onto the rooftop of the Radius headquarters. The city glittered below, a chaotic matrix of lights and lives, each one pulsing with potential. Hayden joined me with 2 glasses of cider. "The board approved your mentorship expansion," he said. "International chapters even." I took the glass. "Let's make sure we fund them properly this time," he grinned. "You've turned us from a tech company into a movement." "That was never the plan," I said, staring at the skyline. "It was just fixing what felt broken." It worked. We clinked glasses, a quiet acknowledgement between 2 people who'd once stood on opposite sides of a conference table. 2 weeks. Later, I received an invitation to speak at MIT, my alma mater, about ethics and software design. I almost declined. Not out of fear, but because I wasn't sure what more I had to say. Then I remembered something Garrick had once told me. Some people are just meant to build quietly in the background. He was wrong. We are all meant to speak, to create, to be seen. So I accepted. I stood behind the podium, taking a breath before beginning. "Years ago," I said, "I worked at a company where I believed loyalty meant security. I stayed quiet. I kept my head down. I told myself I was being patient, not invisible. But patience without recognition becomes exploitation." A pause. When I finally stood up, I thought revenge was what I wanted. But what I found instead was something far more powerful. The ability to reshape the system for the next person standing at that crossroads. I clicked to the final slide. A picture of Tessa, now leading a global team, mentoring interns just as I once had mentored. Her. "She's the reason we fight for change," I said. "Not so we can sit in bigger offices, but so we can open the doors wider behind us." The standing ovation that followed wasn't about applause. It was affirmation from an industry that had finally begun to listen. In the years that followed, I pulled back from operations, focusing more on advocacy, education, and mentorship. Tessa became Radius's youngest VP. Marlene retired, but only after seeing our mentee program grow to 12 countries. Vance helped draft legislation for employee IP rights, his name now cited in law journals. As for Garrick, I never heard from him again. But the plaque he'd sent remained in my office. Not as a trophy, but a warning. Because empires aren't built from innovation alone. They're built on how you treat people when you think no one's watching. One afternoon, a young intern knocked on my office door. "I read your story," she said. "I just wanted to say, I think I needed to hear that someone like you existed." I smiled, pushing a notepad toward her. "Then go write your own story," I said. "Make sure they remember your name." 12 years at Porter taught me how it feels to be invisible. 12 months at Radius taught me how to be undeniable. And the years after taught me the most important truth of all. You are not replaceable, no matter what they tell you.